Welcome back to This Week in History. Gather round, space nerds, because this week, 50 years ago today, humans landed on the moon. Or on a Hollywood surface, depending on whether or not tinfoil is your preferred hat of choice. By now you know of two of the men who landed on the moon, the gregarious Buzz Aldrin and Ryan Gosling. Ugh! Neil Armstrong. I even practiced. But what do you know about the third man on Apollo 11? The man who the entire mission depended on? One Michael Collins. Collins, like most astronauts, was a test pilot in the Air Force. He actually started flying F-86 Sabres, then became one of the bomber pilots who was tasked with learning to deliver nuclear weapons. In 1963, he applied and got into NASA's astronaut program. His first space mission was in 1966 aboard Gemini 10. But his big day came in 1969. Really, it was a big week. Hence This Week in History. Only 5 months left in the year, and NASA had to make good on that promise from President John F. Kennedy from back in 1961 to put a man on the moon before the end of the 60s. After taking off from Cape Canaveral, it was Collins' job to detach the Columbia, the spacecraft, from the rockets. And then it was his job to extract the lunar module, reattach it to the Columbia, and then put the Columbia lunar module together on a track to the moon. I mean, it's no parallel parking a Suburban on the driver's side in the middle of DC, but it's okay. Once they made it to the moon's orbit, the Columbia detached from the lunar module called the Eagle and then drifted down to the surface of the moon. And thus began what can be considered the loneliest day in human existence for Michael Collins. While astronauts Aldrin and Armstrong landed on the moon and began taking samples and broadcasting their entire stay on the moon, Collins sat in orbit for almost an entire day by himself. At one point, he didn't even have radio signals coming back from Earth for about an hour. All he could do was sit and worry. What if Armstrong and Aldrin crashed on their way to land on the moon? Even after they landed, what if they couldn't make it back up to orbit? After a day in what I still consider is the loneliest seat in the solar system, eventually Collins linked back up with Armstrong and Aldrin. They got back into the Columbia and headed back towards Earth. Collins was afraid that tragedy would make him a marked man, but in having such wild success, he's actually become a forgotten hero. I hope you found This Week in History to be out of this world! And if you didn't, still give us a like and a subscribe, and we'll be back in another week to do another week of This Week in History.